Folks, in a sport like no other, this is a week like no other. Rivalry week has arrived, and the only bad points to rivalry week, the only bad aspects to this particular week is that there's just too much bad blood, good football, healthy hate to go around for all of us to catch all of it. That is the only downside to this. And then number two, already, can you believe it? Already, this is our last regular season weekend of college football. It is the shortest season on the sports map. The NBA lasts forever. The Major League Baseball season lasts almost as long as the NBA. And of course, the NFL starts right about the same time as college football, but extends to the first week of February. And there are multiple games being played all the way into the second and third week of January. College football is precious. It's a precious, precious, precious commodity. And this is the ultimate right here. This is what college football is all about. It's about rivalries. It's about tradition and prestige. It's about, again, healthy hate, sports context hate. And when you look across the country, I see so many rivalries that I love for different reasons and see the unique quality of those rivalries. Whether we take it all the way up to the far northwest with Washington State playing this weekend for the Apple Cup, Oregon State for the Civil War. I just got done recording a segment previewing Oregon and Oregon State. Stanford and Cal just played this past weekend. That should be played the final weekend of the season, but it's Stanford and Cal. Of course, the big game out west, USC, UCLA, should be played this weekend, but they just played. The Territorial Cup in the Pac-12 as well with Arizona State. A number of clashes in the Big 12, as typically the Big 12 will spread out its rivalries across the college football map. Kansas State, Oklahoma, Texas, etc. Of course, in the SEC, we have a newfound rivalry with number one LSU taking on Texas A&M, a rivalry that has been pushed by the SEC, and based on the two proximities of the locations of the schools, has certainly worked. Arkansas and Missouri play the Friday after Thanksgiving. And, of course, the Iron Bowl. Alabama-Auburn may be the most intense rivalry of them all. On Thanksgiving night, Ole Miss and Mississippi State, it's the Egg Bowl. It's a game that I covered for 6 seasons in Mississippi. The Egg Bowl, very intense, means a whole lot in the Magnolia State. That will be waged on Thanksgiving night, as it has been a brilliant move by those two particular schools to grab Thanksgiving night. Then, of course, you got Georgia Tech. You got the Palmetto State up for grabs with Clemson taking on South Carolina. North Carolina State wage war this weekend. Wake Forest and Duke, that's a rivalry, yes. The game. As we move to the Big Ten, I just got done with a discussion with Steve Dace from Michigan Podcast, and wait till you hear that two-parter with Steve Dace from Michigan Podcast talking about the history of the game, arguably the best rivalry in college sports, arguably the best rivalry in sports, arguably the best rivalry in college football. We will save Army and Navy for a different category. That should not be grouped in with the rest of these. Minnesota, Wisconsin, for Paul Bunyan's axe. That would be the Paul Bunyan axe, as it were. And, of course, the Big Ten Western Division Championship. Northwestern Illinois get it on this weekend. Iowa, Nebraska has become a recent addition to the rivalry weekend, courtesy the Big Ten scheduling those two to go at it. And, of course, they are bordering states. Who have I missed? Who have I missed out there? Louisville, Kentucky, Florida State. How could I miss Florida State? Of course, wage war on this weekend as well. Right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, we welcome you into the live chat. I see that I've got 44 comments to address already, and of course, many of those are you guys just talking college football yourselves, which is great. I love it. Lock into what we've got going here at the Voice of College Football. Please like the videos, comment, subscribe right there. Share the videos out on social media as well. It's my aim tonight to look at what over this past weekend has really mattered to the college football playoff race, get you previewed for what we have in store for you. And then, of course, Rivalry Week, week 14 of college football. Like no other sport, folks, like no other sport. So, really, the two games that mattered on Saturday night in regards to the playoff race involved the Oregon situation in the desert and Oklahoma holding off TCU 28-24. Of course, the Utah game could have mattered, but they dusted off Arizona as expected, 35-6. But it was that Oregon collapse, wilting in the desert, the Ducks falling in the desert, 31-28 to Arizona State and Herm Edwards. And if you missed this little nugget from the weekend, Herm Edwards at Arizona State is now 5-4 against ranked opponents. Now, Herm Edwards only went 7-6 last year, and his current squad is only 5-4. So I guess on the downside, you could say that they've lost to a lot of unranked opponents, probably some teams that they should not have lost to. But on the plus side, for a team that's a composite 12-10 the past 2 years to be 5-4 against ranked opponents, that is Herm Edwards getting the job done when his team is typically an underdog, as they were by 2 touchdowns with Oregon coming to town and Justin Herbert. And what a masterful job they did on the defensive side of the ball, game planning for Herbert, CJ Verdell and company, and limiting Oregon to 7 points until early fourth quarter, and completely confusing Justin Herbert on occasion to win that one in exciting fashion. Jaden Daniels had a breakout game if he needed one, 408 yards passing for him as Arizona State won 31-28, spoiling the Pac-12's playoff hopes in regards to its number one possibility. Of course, Utah certainly has a resume that's right up there, and we'll see where they stand in the rankings release on Tuesday night. But Oregon had the benefit of the better non-conference game and the more impressive resume to date. But of course, that now belongs to Utah at 10-1 with a game against Colorado coming up this weekend. So Utah, it's all on you in terms of the Pac-12 championship hopes of gaining a college football playoff appearance. Oklahoma, I expected to struggle against TCU. They did. They only won 28-24. But I think at this stage in the season, with one loss, they are in much better position than they have been in recent weeks. I don't think that they'll really be docked too many points by the College Football Playoff Selection Committee for a narrow win at home against the TCU team that is now only 5-6 on the season. Really, the result of the night that helped Oklahoma was, of course, the Oregon loss in the Pac-12. So now there is a great possibility that the Pac-12 champion will have 2 losses, or that the Pac-12 champion will not have an impressive non-conference game. Utah playing BYU was the best that they could do. Otherwise, earlier in the day, obviously, Ohio State took care of Penn State. If you watched the game, you saw that the Buckeyes dominated for the first 3 quarters. Then they got in trouble in the third quarter. They gave a number of possessions away. Penn State, to its credit, got back in it at 21-17. And then the Buckeyes put down the throttle on defense in the final 10 minutes to win at 28-17. All right, we got a call coming in. 860-325-3687 is our number. I'll put it on the screen here in just a second. Hey, it's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Maryland sucks, Mark.
Yeah, they do. You've come to that realization.
I mean, how the hell do we lose 54-7 to these Nebraska Cornhuskers? I mean, I have no explanation on it. I really don't. I mean, I don't know what happened from the beginning of the season to now. I really don't. And after I called in last time, you made comments on Mike Loxley, and I disagree with them because I knew what he was trying to build and everything. I might have to start double guessing myself on Loxley. Next season is going to be a big season for him. I mean, he better have his team in a bowl game next season.
I don't know if you were around for this comment, but it might have been right after I had a phone call with you. I would think that that would have been the time that I would have made this comment. I don't see anything on Mike Loxley's resume prior to getting the Maryland job that really speaks to being a head coach in the Big Ten. He had an awful time in New Mexico, and of course he was at Alabama, but he didn't do anything to upgrade the offense there. I don't really see anything on his resume other than losing football games and getting in trouble off the field.
Well, a few comments on that. I personally think he did upgrade the offense in Alabama. Maybe not completely due to him exactly, because of the quarterback he was coaching in Tua, and he got investigated for that off-field incident, and it turned out nothing happened. But I mean, his name was kind of under hot water at New Mexico. But I want to be honest with you, Mark. You want to know what I think the problem is? And with Maryland, there's two big problems with Maryland. There's two big problems, I think. I think the first problem is there's still some residue in that whole player's death thing. And two, I personally don't think Maryland should have ever left the ACC for the Big Ten. And I think that was a mistake. And I think you're starting to see some of the stuff that you could tell is maybe a mistake. So if first as a Maryland fan in like 2024 or whenever the deal's up, I wanted to get the hell out of the Big Ten. I don't care if we go into the Big 12. I don't want us in the SEC. I would like to go back to the ACC personally, but I think those are the biggest two problems in Maryland football right now. Because let's be honest, if they're trying to make a move for basketball, A, it would have stayed in the ACC because that's the best basketball conference, and two, there's 68 teams that make the journey every year. It doesn't matter what conference you're in to make the journey for NCAA. As long as you're in the journey, you have a shot because it's March Madness. So I really thought that when they made that move to the ACC to the Big Ten, I thought it was a mistake. And I would like us to get the hell out of the Big Ten personally. That's my 2 cents. What do you think?
I agree with you. It's not going to happen, though. Those ties have been made, and that's not going to happen anytime soon. Maryland, from a basketball standpoint, was certainly ingrained in the culture of the ACC. From a football standpoint, not as much. It was an independent for a long time in both sports, but certainly fit into the fabric of the ACC and had a number of rivalries that made a whole lot of sense in the ACC, especially from a basketball standpoint. From a football standpoint, just look at the ACC Coastal Division right now, and Maryland, being as bad as it is, would only need to upgrade a small amount to be able to get into that mix, as opposed to running up against Ohio State, Michigan State, and Penn State on a yearly basis. That just seems like a mountain to climb that they will never be able to accomplish.
I mean, I really thought it was a bad mistake. I thought that the president and others, like athletic director, I thought that they were just in it for the money.
Bingo! That's what I didn't get to. We're thinking of athletics. We're thinking of competition on the field. We're thinking about what interests us, which is watching good football and good basketball. At this stage of my life, I don't care about the basketball. I don't watch college basketball anymore. I used to love it, but I just don't have time for it. And there's too much churn in regards to the rosters that I just can't keep up with it, and it doesn't interest me anymore. So I'm strictly invested in football. In Maryland in the Big Ten only makes a little bit more sense than Rutgers in the Big Ten. But it does make a little bit more sense than Rutgers, and they are, based on their geography more than anything, a little bit more capable if they get the right guy in place and if the administration is on board and invested in competing in the Big Ten. And we saw that the first couple of years that they were in the conference.
Well, every team that usually gets, like, for example, Missouri, when they moved from the Big 12 to the SEC, they're in the SEC championship game. So I mean, that I expected that we would at least compete, especially with Michigan and Ohio State being kind of down at that time. I thought we would compete some, which we did. But right now, I mean, I'm just looking at at the plans in a few years down the road. There's no way we're winning that Big Ten East. I mean, there's just no way. And personally, I think, as I said, the first point, I still think there's residue from Jordan McNair's death in the off season. Now, granted, Jordan McNair's dad approved of Mike Locksley, and Mike Locksley is from the area, and I understand all that. And I'm not saying fire Mike Locksley as a Maryland fan, but he better have some answers next season. I do not care what we do in this Michigan State game. If we win, great. If we lose, great. But I'm done with this season. I can't wait till next season. The good news is that there's still a lot of people, as a Maryland fan, though. This college football season, I still am enjoying it. I know some people are talking about next season. I don't know why. Maybe for their individual teams. But, I mean, there's a lot of big games this week. I mean, you have 2 games out for spots in the championship games in Virginia Tech, Virginia. I forget the name of that rivalry. My apologies. And then also Minnesota and Wisconsin. And game day is going to Minnesota, which I find kind of interesting because it's really cold out there in November. So I hope they stay warm. But, I mean, I can't wait for this college football week coming up. You have, all these rivalry games. It always goes you expect the unexpected. I can't really wait. And I hope Maryland just does better next year. Hopefully we beat Michigan State, even though I highly doubt it. Even though Michigan State might be singing the swan song for their head coach, Mike D'Antonio. So we'll see what happens there. But hopefully Maryland goes ahead and gets the win. Go Terps. Thanks for taking my call, Mark. And go Terps.
Thanks, McD. The gentleman's name is Mark D'Antonio, of course, at Michigan State. McD giving us a healthy helping of Maryland football talk to get us started when we're thinking college football playoff and conference championship games and rivalry week. Maryland's rival is... Now, why did the Big Ten get away from scheduling Maryland and Rutgers as the final weekend of the season? What I think they're trying to do is boost both of them and not say, well, we've kind of pushed them off into a corner over here as the stepchildren, and they can play each other while all the rivalries are going on in the rest of the real Big Ten. And so they've tried to mix it up because that's what happened over the first several seasons in which Rutgers and Maryland were in the Big Ten, is that they were scheduled against each other the last weekend of the season, and Penn State played Michigan State, but they moved that game that had become a minor, slight rivalry of sorts over the past 20 years when Penn State and Michigan State were scheduled the final weekend. And I think the thought process was, we are making Rutgers and Maryland look like stepchildren off to the side. And that's going to be difficult not to make them look that way. But they're trying to mix it up in regards to the past couple of years, scheduling Penn State and Rutgers, Maryland and Michigan State on the final weekend of the season to try to ingrain them into Big Ten culture. All right. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line? Yes, who's on the line?
Hey, Mark. This is Landon Found. How are you? Thanks for taking my call.
I'm doing just fine. What's going on tonight?
Before I push a narrative for the University of Miami after the astonishing loss to FIU last night, I want to say a word about the offense with Dan Enos. Dan Enos seems to be a little bit too methodical and a little bit too calculating when he's calling plays and when he's formulating. I think he should just let Jaron, everybody's been talking about using the talent and using the speed and spread out the offense and, let Jaron make mistakes. Let him throw some interceptions. Let him sling the ball around. Just go out there and play college football. Why does Dan Enos have to insist on running this methodical pro-type offense with all this talent on the field? Why can't he just recognize what I'm doing is not working? I need to make an adjustment.
I think there's
So,
a possibility
anyway.
that Manny Diaz influences on that offense, meaning that he trusts his defense so much and expected it to be a better defense than it's turned out to be. But based on the personnel coming back from last season and based on the schedule more than anything, based on the lack of offensive firepower that they have been facing this season, that they would rely on defense, running game, and getting big plays out of the passing game, not necessarily consistency out of the passing game to manufacture winning. I think that's been the plan.
I didn't quite follow. So, what you're saying?
If you're a
is the
defensive-minded coach, if you're a
oriented around defense,
if you're a defensive-minded head coach, you're averse to mistakes and risk. Therefore, and if you feel you've got confidence in your defense, a defense that he has been coaching for the past 3 seasons, that he's basically saying, I trust my defense. We play a weak schedule with a lot of weak offenses. Therefore, we should be able to contain teams enough that we don't have to take chances and risks running our offense.
I can see that.
That's what I'm guessing. That's what I'm seeing.
But it hasn't worked.
Oh, it didn't work. Didn't work. They've overrated their defense and underestimated opponents.
Yeah. Very much so.
I thought the Georgia
can
Tech.
I push my narrative?
Yes. Absolutely.
Okay. SB Nation article 2017. I won't bug you for too long. 11 discouraging year one losses by college football coaches who went on to big success. There's a list here. Can I highlight a few?
Absolutely. That's why we're here.
All right. So Nick Saban's 2007 loss to ULM.
Mm-hmm.
Dabo Swinney's loss in 2008 to a really bad 2-10 Maryland team.
Okay.
This going way back, Frank Beamer, 1987. They lost 9 games that year. Bobby Bowden's 1976 Florida State loss at home to a Clemson team that finished 3-6-2. And I'll finish up with 2 more. Howard Schnellenberger's loss in 1979 to Florida A&M. But the year before that, they were 1AA national champions. And finish off with Bob Stoops in 1999 loses to a bad Notre Dame team. This is from an article from SB Nation.
What was the last example? What was the last one?
I'm sorry?
What was the last example?
Bob Stoops loses to Oklahoma. Bob Stoops loses to a bad Notre Dame team. Notre Dame finished 5-7 that year in 1999.
All right.
So
I will give some validation to your first 2 examples. Nick Saban at Alabama.
Okay.
The Alabama program, obviously, that we know now is not the Alabama program that we knew from the mid-2000s, but it was still Alabama. They still recruited well.
Way.
What?
Yeah, no, that's when it was Mike Shula.
Absolutely. I know who the coaches were, but I'm basically outlining that Alabama had a dip in the mid-2000s. But it wasn't it was substantial, but it didn't last a long time. They won an SEC championship in 1999, so they weren't that far removed from being a tremendous SEC power, and they were throughout most of the 90s going into the 2000s. And then, they had their fair share of coaching issues, Mike Price being the most infamous. They did win a Cotton Bowl, I believe, following the 2003 or 2003 season against Texas Tech, and they finished 10-2, and then in the top 10 in the nation. They had a very brief dip that Nick Saban obviously was then hired to correct, and he did. So the program wasn't as bad for as long as this Miami situation. But there was a dip there, and there was a regression in recruiting, and the Louisiana Monroe effort was obviously a black mark, but it was Nick Saban's first year. The Dabo Swinney situation as well. I would highlight that Clemson was not a bad football program when Dabo Swinney took them over from Tommy Bowden, that they were a decent football program. They were a
above average at best.
Fringe top 25. If you look at the program year to year, I'm not talking about one specific year. I'm talking about like a 5-year stretch. They were winning 7 and 8 games. But I do.
They were slow. You're right. They were slowly climbing before Dabo Sweeney. I remember that.
Yes.
You're right.
Now, if you look at the other examples, the reason I separate those two is because those football programs were on good ground. They were on decent ground. Nothing close to what they are now. They were not top 5, top 2 programs then. But their dip was very minimal, and it was for a brief period of time prior to hiring Sweeney and especially Saban. But with the rest of those programs that you cite, with Bowden losing in 1976 or 7, Schnellenberger in 1979, those were just prior to those gentlemen lifting and elevating those programs completely to another class, another level. The Florida State football in 1975 and Florida State football in 1980 were completely different programs. By 1980, Florida State was winning Orange Bowls and finishing in the top 5 in the nation. Bobby Bowden did that quick of a reclamation project on Florida State football. Florida State football in 1973, 75, 77, they were losing close to double-digit games. They were not anywhere close to what he made them in just a 5-year span. And the same could be said of Miami football. The Miami football team that hit the field in 1983 and won a national championship and really took a turn in 1980. If you look up the 1980 squad, they went 10-2. That was their first big break with Jim Kelly at quarterback. But what they were churning out just a couple years prior to that was abysmal. So those weren't really embarrassing losses at the time. As embarrassing as the loss was by Nick Saban in Alabama losing to Louisiana Monroe, because Alabama was still Alabama. It was like Texas losing a game right now. That would be the best example I could come up with right this second, or Florida State losing a game right now. We still view them as being Florida State and Texas, but they're in a down cycle, especially Florida State. Texas, I don't know so much. Obviously, they've only had this bad season after a good season last year. But those other programs had not been elevated yet. Florida State was not Florida State. Miami was not Miami.
You're right. That's true. Yeah. I mentioned that because Manny Diaz in the post-game press conference.
Yes.
He told the press and the media what he told the players in the locker room after the game, which was, hey, guys, keep your head up. LSU lost to Troy a couple years ago. Look where they are now. And then, yeah.
I understand his point if you're going to isolate one game, but LSU didn't lose to Troy and then lose to the worst team in the SEC and then lose to like the third worst team in the SEC. That was an isolated game. And let's see, that was in 2016? 2016 or 17 against Troy. That LSU team still finished in the top 15 in the nation. That was just an aberration of a game. And it was unacceptable, but still, it was an aberration of a game. That was still a top 15 to 20 LSU team. They're doing this every like 3 weeks. They're losing to somebody, or they're beating Western Michigan by 5 points, or they're losing to FIU, or they're losing to Georgia Tech. They are I made the statement last week before the FIU game that I can just about guarantee, as I scan the nation, that Miami was the only team that lost 2 games this year as a double-digit 14-point favorite. And now they've lost 3 games as a 14 to 21-point favorite. Nobody else has more than one of those games this year.
And it seems like the more experienced coaches recognize Manny Diaz's inexperience, and they're preparing and going into these games, I think, confident against Manny Diaz, where maybe they say to themselves, I know Miami has more talent, and they may be even a better team, but I think I can beat Manny Diaz. And something stirs that coach up and that coaching staff up, and in turn gets the team stirred up, and they're able to go in there and get victories. That's my take. I mean, for example, I don't think Butch Davis is afraid of Manny Diaz. I don't think the Virginia Tech coach is afraid of Manny Diaz.
Absolutely.
Matt Brown is not okay. That's what I'm getting at. Maybe they're a little bit more battle hardened, and they're like, okay, I can take this guy. You know, I can compete against this guy, and I can beat him. Yeah.
All right, sir. Thanks for the call. We appreciate it. Hopefully things get better for the Canes. I thought they were on a very slight upswing. The two most significant positive results from them this season, I think, was besting a Louisville team that had just beaten Virginia and Wake Forest, arguably the second and third best teams in the conference, and putting up 52 on Louisville. And then, of course, even though it was not a pretty effort, beating Virginia, I thought was going to catapult them back into the race in the Coastal Division, but it did not, because then they turned around and lost to a bunch of inferior teams.
Yeah.
All right, sir. Thanks for the call. We appreciate it.
Thanks for taking my call. I enjoyed it. Bye-bye.
Yes, Miami. My goodness. They lost to FIU, and they were down 20-0. They were down 20-0. They did rally. They did give it a shot, but still they had to score a touchdown with like 30 seconds left in the game just to make it 30-24. They were down by 2 scores. Insert Georgia State beating Tennessee. That's what that game was yesterday. FIU, not one of the better group of 5 teams, not one of the better Conference USA / Sunbelt level teams. A mediocre team in that conference at 6-5. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
What's up, Marcus? DeAndre, how you doing?
DeAndre, thank you so much for the contribution. I appreciate it there to the super chat.
Oh, yes. Anytime, man. Anytime. What else I got to ask you? How's Alabama going to sneak in the playoffs this year? I mean, I wonder how the committee going to get them in there.
Well, let's see how they could do that. They could just say they're one of the 4 best teams. Here they go. Boom. They're there. So LSU's in. Well, let's say Ohio State loses. Let's say a 2-loss Wisconsin team wins the Big Ten championship. So the Big Ten's gone. The Pac-12 is going to be gone. Or even if the Pac-12 is not gone and Utah is the Pac-12 champion, the committee could certainly argue that Alabama's 1-loss team in the SEC is better than a 1-loss Pac-12 champion. They could make, even though Utah's behind Alabama right now, and Alabama's going to have a win against Auburn, an Auburn team that beat the Oregon team that Utah needs to beat in the Pac-12 championship game. So the committee could completely eliminate the Pac-12 and even say that Oklahoma's schedule is awful outside of conference, and that they have squeaked by a lot of marginal teams or decent teams like TCU and Iowa State and a few others, lost to Kansas State, have a bad loss on their schedule, not a good loss on its schedule against Kansas State, while Alabama's lost to the number 1 team in the country by 1 score. Oh, they could talk their way into a playoff spot. Absolutely. The committee could try to convince people out there that Alabama has earned a playoff spot. Yep.
Yeah, especially with a bad schedule, boy. I tell you, the year that Alabama beat Clemson in the semifinals, who were the conference? Who else was in there? Georgia and Oklahoma.
Are we talking about last year?
No, a couple years ago.
The year before. Yes. Yeah. Georgia beat Oklahoma at the Orange Bowl, at the Rose Bowl.
Right. Yeah, Clemson lost at the Sugar. Yeah, but yeah, that just amazed me that they will possibly overlook Utah for them to get in there. I heard your conversation about Texas and Miami and schools like that. The problem with a lot of those schools like Texas and Miami, in the 80s and 90s, even the early 2000s, when these teams were really, really good, you got so many other schools out there right now, Mark. I mean, like, think about it. Baylor, I don't remember in the early 2000s when Vince Young was coming through, I don't think Baylor was that good of a team. And you got TCU, you got so many other teams. I think Miami's falling in the same situation about recruiting. You can't just dominate that area when it's full of athletes like you used to, because you got so many other teams in the state of Florida right now that are picking those guys off, like South Florida, what's that other school called? Central Florida. Then you got people like Clemson and Alabama cherry picking players out. And I think Texas falling in the same boat. I mean, I know Texas A&M has been a decent school, but you know they've got just as much money according to Forbes as Texas does, and you just can't dominate like you used to. You got SMU want to come up, and some of these guys are seeing there like, why should I stay there and go to Texas where I'm going to sit on the bench and I can show what I can do at these other schools? So I think that's what's really hurting those schools like Texas and Miami. Whereas with Clemson, you know, they might get some from Georgia, they might get some from North Carolina, they might go up to Virginia and get some. But I'm not going to say they're going to get the best players out of South Carolina, because a lot of the best players, to me, look at Clowney and Ingram and Jeffries. A lot of times they go over to South Carolina. But South Carolina problem is they can't recruit outside the state of South Carolina in a couple of areas. They may even seem like they focus on South Carolina players. So I don't think Texas and Miami is going to have a big rise like people think they are.
Well, DeAndre, I don't know if you looked across the nation in the 80s and 90s that you would find that much less parity than what you find now. Look at the Big Ten throughout the 80s and 90s. Ohio State and Michigan were the marquee teams, but that was based on popularity. Based on just the results on the field, they were just slightly above Iowa, Illinois, Penn State once they joined in 93, Wisconsin once the early 90s hit. There were a lot of good teams in the Big Ten. Let's go to Clemson. Clemson, we've talked about the ACC. North Carolina was good for a period of time. Georgia Tech was good for a period of time. Clemson, Florida State, obviously, once they joined. Virginia was a good program during the 80s into the 90s. If you look at the Pac-12, Colorado had their shot where they were good in the Big 8 at the time, the Big 12. Arkansas was good. If you go across the country, I don't know that there was that much lack of parity. If you go through the 80s and 90s, a lot of teams shared the wealth at the top of the college football world. I would say more than now. Isn't it a college football landscape right now that's owned by Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, Oklahoma, and Georgia? Don't they pretty much own the world right now? If one of those teams don't, I'll be shocked if one of those teams don't win the national championship this year. Well, I'll throw LSU in this year. They've arrived this year. But over the past 5 years, that's pretty much been your scene. Ohio State has ruled the Big Ten. Even the years they haven't won the Big Ten, everybody knew they were the best team in the Big Ten. Clemson has owned the ACC, and they took it over from a program that owned it by itself. Florida State, there wasn't like a bunch of teams fighting Florida State. There was Florida State, and there was pretty much everybody else. Clemson started to challenge them, around 2011, 2012, and then they finally caught them and passed them. And now Clemson owns the ACC. Oklahoma owns the Big 12. Alabama has owned the SEC, and they're getting a little bump now from LSU and from Georgia. The Pac-12 has been more scattered amongst a number of teams. Oregon had their run. USC had their run under Pete Carroll. But over the last 5 years, there's been like 4 or 5 schools rule the nation.
Right. You might be right, but And also back then, somebody would pay you $100 deal to go do something or come to a school or dropping cars off at your family house. It was kind of different,
Sure.
Like Ed Dickinson, how you go to SMU and you right there by Texas and other schools. But so I think it was a little bit different. The Wild Bill yonder, but the television market too. I mean, it's hard to say what's causing all of it, but I think that's just part of it. But I don't think Texas and Miami. I think they're gonna be good, but not great because they got a lot of challengers in their areas now. And again, back in the day, hey, I'm gonna go to Nebraska out in the middle of nowhere because they're always on national TV, or I'm gonna go to Notre Dame or Michigan because they're always on TV, or Michigan State. But now everybody's on TV. I know I have made that point a couple of times. Like, you can find an Old Dominion game on TV, and I didn't even know they had a football team. I knew they were good at girls basketball for a long time, but I didn't even know they had a football team. So you can look at those schools like that. But I just wish the committee would do a better job of saying what they are looking for. I'm to the point that I want to say I want 6 teams, but I don't want to see 9 and 2 teams in there. I can deal with 11 and 1 or 12 and 0, but I don't want to see 9 and 2 teams. I mean, unless they win the conference and they have some really close losses. I can tell you, like who was that? Penn State a couple of years ago was 9 and 2 and won the conference, or 10 and 2 won the conference. I would like to see them in there a couple of years ago when Clemson beat Ohio State 31-0.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to see them. I would like to see them in there.
Well,
I would like to see Central Florida in there a couple of years ago.
So that Penn State team goes to the argument that I hear rarely brought up, but I think it's something to be considered. That Penn State team was a completely different team in December than what they were in September. They lost to Pitt in September. They lost to Michigan by 32 points in September, but they went on a run and they rampaged their way through the Big Ten, beat a number 2 Ohio State team, beat a good Wisconsin team in the Big Ten championship game, and they were clearly not the same team in December when the committee was making its selections than they were when they racked up those 2 losses back in September. And I'm not saying that should be considered, but it's worth considering. Do we just take the record and the resume and count the September games as much as the games that were just played last week? That's typically what I do. But I do understand the context of, let's look at this team. This team lost 2 games in September. Now they've won 8 games in a row, and they've beaten Ohio State and a bunch of other top Big Ten teams, Iowa, Minnesota, some other decent teams. And they just won the Big Ten championship over Wisconsin. And so maybe this isn't the same team that lost 2 games in September.
Right, and that's what I agree with that. Cause like everybody makes a big deal about Clemson. Maybe if Clemson and Carolina played again, which won't happen, maybe Clemson will beat the holy mess out of Carolina this time. I mean, we really don't know. Maybe Clemson had a bad day, or there was something they haven't self-scouted that Carolina so I won't take that they exposed. But we really don't know a lot of times why some of these guys play. I mean, I don't think Trevor Lawrence has threw an interception since the 5th game of the year. After that Louisville game, that's the last game I remember him throwing the INT. And he's done improved. Now, he might have been people say, well, he played Wofford or some other school or something like that. But I honestly think that there need to be a little tweak in it. Get the top 2 teams a bye. Let the smaller schools get their chance in there. Or if there's a 16 that's deserving, like Oklahoma and Utah this year, maybe we need to let them in and let them have their chance to show what they can do.
We don't want 6, DeAndre. That's a bad number.
I know you want 8. Well,
the 6 doesn't work. You got to give bye weeks. You got to give buys, and the buys don't work. It's unfair.
That's true. But look, technically, I told the Alabama fan this. Was it fair when Clemson had to play a championship game and Alabama had a fifth week to get a week extra to get ready for it? The year they beat Kelly Bryant, they didn't have to play an SEC championship game.
Sure. Well, that's not a bye week, though.
So,
that's not a bye week. That's an extra week to prepare. If you're giving a bye week, no. A true bye week would be you're telling one team you've got to win 3 games to win a national championship. These other 2 teams, they only have to win 2 games to win a national championship. That's a huge disadvantage. And the bye week that you're speaking of happened 6 weeks earlier in terms of rest, as opposed to happening the week before the first playoff game. So while everybody at the other 4 teams are playing a playoff game, there's 2 teams sitting out that get a bye. And they not only get the probability advantage of the mathematics that state they have a significantly easier path because they have to play 1 less game, but they also get to rest their athletes while everybody else is beating up on you. Can you imagine LSU's playing Ohio State and Clemson's playing Georgia and whoever, and Alabama and Oklahoma are just sitting there? After those 4 teams go at it the week before, the disadvantage of not just the mathematics of having to play an additional game, but the wear and tear on your athletes playing that kind of an opponent the week before, the advantage given to those 2 bye teams. And on top of that, DeAndre, I've told this to anybody who has offered up the 6-team playoff system. Give me a year. Give me any year you want to, and tell me what 6 teams are going to make the playoffs and would have made the playoffs in that particular year. And you tell me what 2 teams should have been given the byes, and I will completely obliterate your argument as to why those should have been the 2 teams that got the byes. It's impossible to determine.
If you say so, but I don't think that I don't like the fact that a team don't have to play a championship game and everybody else do too. That's why I'm saying the system is not, and life ain't fair, but the system is just not right. I mean, you gotta be what's it called? You gotta be equal all the way around in this if you're gonna do it like that. Cause I don't know how does the FBS do it? Where North Dakota State in there and Sacramento State, don't they get byes?
I don't know now. They used to have 16 teams. I think they upped it to 24 teams, didn't they? I don't know. I don't pay any attention to it.
Yeah. But yeah, they got byes too. I know I pay attention to CIAA, that level division too. I know they get byes. But I don't know. It's hard to say. But I'm really interested to see what they're going to do this year, because I think this is going to be one of the hardest years that they have picking people for it outside those top, outside of Clemson, LSU, and if LSU went out and Ohio State went out. This is going to be one of the hardest years.
Well, what the committee's rooting for in regards to making it an easy decision for them is for obviously Clemson wins, LSU wins out in the SEC, Ohio State wins out in the Big Ten, and then Oregon wins the Pac-12, so the Pac-12 is gone, and then Oklahoma wins out in the Big 12, and you've got 1-loss teams all over the place winning every conference, and you've got a nice, clean 4-team selection.
And see, this is my next issue too, Mark. I don't know if you know this. The top seed get to pick where they want to play at this year. I don't know if they did that last year, because I had heard that Alabama was closer to Dallas, where they want to play in Florida, because Oklahoma would have had a home field advantage in that game, because they said Norman is closer to Dallas. But what happened if they be like, we want the Peach Bowl to have Clemson and LSU and let Ohio State be number 1, and they pick the Fiesta Bowl or something like that. I mean, it's crazy how it could be rigged like that.
So what's the issue with that?
I mean, it's just crazy that they could rig it and say, hey, Clemson, Ohio State, Clemson, LSU, we're going to let Ohio State jump LSU, and we're going to put LSU and Clemson in the Peach Bowl because they're naturally Southern teams.
Well, if Georgia finishes, if
Go ahead.
LSU finishes the season by beating Texas A&M and Georgia in an SEC championship game when Georgia's the fourth-rated team in the country, and Ohio State beats Michigan, that's in the top 12 or 13, and then beats, let's say, Minnesota, and they're roughly 10th or 12th in the country, the committee will in no way be able to validate or argue how LSU would get jumped by Ohio State.
Right. So, and it's going to be crazy. This is going to be one of those ones.
I hope it is. I want it to be crazy. I want chaos. Anything to debunk this system because it's a farce. It's an invitational. It's not a playoff system.
Yeah, that's true. I could totally agree with you.
Anytime you select teams, anytime you have people selecting teams and inviting them to play, that's an invitational. That's not a playoff system. A playoff system's when you got an objective process that determines what teams are going to make it, like we see in the NFL. There aren't the NFL doesn't have a committee that selects what teams are the 16 or the 12 best teams to make the playoffs. There's no argument.
Right. So, all right, Mark, you have a good night, man. I'm going to get to bed. I'm going to listen to the show while I get ready for bed. I hope you all have a good night. Tell the guys, check out my channel, Nice Guy TV.
There it is.
In East Carolina and Pittsburgh Steelers football.
All right, DeAndre, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Have a good night. All right, let's comb through the comments here. Anything else interesting? I saw that I got a super chat. I will post that to the screen. I didn't see who that was. We do have Gator Hater, Knoll Nation right there. Swamping McGee's right there with some of our betting odds. Ohio State a 9-point favorite against Michigan. The over-under is 54, so they're looking at Ohio State winning 31-23. So Vegas says Ohio State 31.5, Michigan 22.5. I should have kept reading, but my math skills aren't that bad. I don't know about taking the over in the Ohio State-Michigan game, but that's really not my thing, the over-under. My thing is picking football games, though. 11-6 against the spread. So jump on over to Patreon, or you can grab the link in the description section of any of the videos. And next to Voice of College Football Community, here's what you get. You get two things. You get my weekly predictions, which, again, 11-6 against the spread last week. And then also number two would be an exclusive live stream with me each and every week per request. So if you make the request as a Patreon member, then you get an exclusive live stream with me. And I'm not talking about me rambling on forever and ever. I bring you on as a guest. We kick around college football. And I envision this as being a fun time in which I can get, as it stands right now, one of you, but let's say 2 or 3 or 4. And we bring you on to talk college football. It's sort of a college football forum on a weekly basis. What question do we have there? Red River Showdown's the best crowd I've ever been live. Somebody had asked best atmosphere. Please bear with me. So you would understand how difficult it is to get some of these comments to the screen, and you would understand why I lose track of some of the comments if you saw the application here on StreamYard that I use to post the comments to the screen. Shay asks, what's the best college football environment you have ever been in? So I haven't been to a lot of college football stadiums in recent years. I covered the SEC for 6 or 7 years, and so I made it to most of the SEC stadiums during that time. And then other than that, I've only been to Ohio State. So I've been to the Liberty Bowl in Memphis for games there. I've been to Alabama. I've been to Auburn. I've been to Ole Miss. I've been to Mississippi State. I've been to a few others. I've been to some of the college bowl game environments, the Georgia Dome for the SEC championship game and the Peach Bowl, and again for a handful of Ohio State games. The loudest stadium I've been to, the most rabid, and again, this is me sitting on my couch because based on my career, I really was only at the games for about 6 or 7 years in the SEC. And aside from that, I'm one to give you an idea. I was offered once free tickets to Ohio State, Michigan, and the drive was only about an hour and a half. Free tickets to Ohio State, Michigan. Somebody, boom, here, Mark, Ohio State, Michigan, free tickets for tomorrow. No thanks. Want to watch the game on my couch. Thank you. Appreciate it. So I've not gone out of my way to visit various college football locations. So most of that has come aside from Ohio State. And I don't think Kent State's going to make it an Akron into this conversation. Outside of those games, most of that has come as somebody who's been working the games. So I've been to some Alabama LSU games, Alabama Auburn games in terms of the intensity of the crowd, the pageantry, the prestige, the marching bands, all of that have been the most impressive. Those games have been the most impressive. Alabama, Tennessee, when Tennessee was relevant and just as good, if not better at that time. Actually, when I was covering Tennessee football in the SEC, Tennessee was better than Alabama and winning, I believe, 9 straight games. Somebody had contributed to the super chat. I wanted to acknowledge them, but I don't see them on the feed. I apologize. Yes, I apologize. It's been lost on my feed here. I would have to go log on here on my other laptop and look it up to see. So thank you so much for the contribution, whomever that was, and I will certainly recognize you when I am able to. So let's run down the schedule for this week and see how good it's going to be, because it is going to be awfully good. The only thing that really, there's nothing to keep me away from football this week except for family. Family will keep me away from football to a certain extent, and that's a good thing. And I cannot possibly DVR enough games or condense enough games on YouTube to watch everything that I want to watch, because I am just that guy that wants to see every rivalry game, even if it's a 2-9 Cal team playing a 4-7 Stanford game. I'd really like to watch that game. And I know they already played. I'm not talking about this year. Let's see what we got. Tuesday and Wednesday night action. Thursday night, Ole Miss, Mississippi State for the Egg Bowl. I've been to many of those games from 1994 to 2000. The Ole Miss, Mississippi State Egg Bowl games. Very intriguing. I love what those two schools have done with the foresight that they've had to say, hey, for anybody who wants to watch college football on Thanksgiving night, they have to watch us play, because we have signed an exclusive contract that we're going to be the only game in town on Thanksgiving night. And it's been something special for this rivalry to capture that segment of College Football Nation. So I think that's a cool thing. All right, starting at noon on Fox, we've got Texas Tech. Virginia Tech play at noon on Friday on ABC. That's a huge game. The winner takes the Coastal Division and becomes the sacrificial lamb for Clemson in the ACC championship game. Also, we've got Iowa taking on Nebraska at noon on Friday on the Big Ten Network. That has typically been a Fox game, but it's on BTN this year because Fox has opted for Texas and Texas Tech. Memphis and Cincinnati, numbers 18 and 19 in the country. And if you check out the American Conference Division standings, a huge game in the American Conference, 3:30 ABC on Friday, Cincinnati and Memphis. We also have Boise State taking on Colorado State, Washington State for the Apple Cup. Although both of those teams are down this year, 4 o'clock Eastern time on Fox. We've got TCU in West Virginia. That's just kind of a leftover makeup game, just a game that does not factor into rivalry weekend in the Big 12, but that's what's left over there. And then later that night, a rivalry game in UCF in South Florida, which was a really, really hot game for a couple times a few years ago, playing on ESPN at 8 o'clock Eastern time. So for me, if I'm able to watch all these games, I am definitely locked in on Virginia Tech. It was an entertaining game last year. Of course, the Hokies have won 15 straight in the series. Virginia was supposed to be the better team, and now I don't know. They're both 8-3 coming into this one, and they're playing not just for pride, but for the Coastal Division Championship. So that's my game at noon. Then at 2:30, I really like Nebraska, Iowa. I would like to get into Missouri and Arkansas, but Arkansas is so bad. That's been a good game in the past. But Nebraska and Iowa get my attention after Virginia Tech. And at 3:30, man, I'm really going to be going back and forth. The traditionalist in me says watch Iowa, Nebraska. But the more important game is, of course, Memphis and Cincinnati. And then certainly that night, there's really nothing to grab anyone's attention, but I'll check out Washington State if I have time. And the night game is UCF in South Florida. There's really not a night game to grab us on Friday night. All right, the big one, the game at noon on Fox on Saturday, Ohio State, Michigan, of course. At the same time, Clemson, South Carolina are playing, as well as Georgia Tech. Also, Louisville and Kentucky, Northwestern Illinois are also playing at noon, as well as the Old Oaken Bucket, which I failed to mention off the top, with Indiana taking on Purdue. The last 2 seasons, the Hoosiers were prevented from going to a bowl game by Purdue, and the Boilers instead went to postseason play. Now I believe Purdue's 5-6, so they need to win over Indiana, and the Hoosiers are already in postseason play. And so we've got Purdue and Indiana at noon. Obviously, my selection at noon is going to be Michigan, Ohio State. I'll put my second and third screens on Clemson, South Carolina, and probably Georgia Tech. Although that's probably not going to be competitive for long. All right, at 3:30. For me, wow. See, it would normally be, of course, the Iron Bowl. But Alabama can't get to the SEC championship game, nor can Auburn. But it's just a spectacle. You've got to watch the Iron Bowl. But at the same time, we've got Wisconsin and Minnesota playing an enormous game, especially if Minnesota wins that game and goes to the Big Ten championship game with 1 loss, having just defeated a Wisconsin team that's 12th or 13th in the country. Huge. So my primary focus is going to be Minnesota, Wisconsin, then the Iron Bowl. And at 3:30, we also have Miami and Duke. And we also have Michigan State and Maryland. Okay, at 4 o'clock, Oregon State. Oregon is already going to the Pac-12 championship game, and they blew their opportunity to make the college football playoff. At 4 o'clock on Fox, what has been a really good game, a cross-national, cross-sectional, national rivalry in recent years, and has been a really good game, but this year shouldn't be. Notre Dame, Stanford. Tennessee, Vanderbilt, of course, a rivalry game on the SEC network at 4. Texas A&M, LSU. Maybe Texas A&M has a chance to beat LSU like they did against Georgia. This time they've got to go to Death Valley. Texas A&M given no breaks by the SEC scheduling committee in going to Georgia and going to LSU to close out the season. Iowa State, Kansas State is a decent game at 7 o'clock on FS1. Houston and Navy. More rivalry games with North Carolina State on the ACC network. Utah needs to beat Colorado. That's the ABC game. That's the ABC game on Saturday night. Utah and Colorado. It means a whole bunch to Utah, obviously, and Colorado needs to win to make a bowl game. But for that to be the ABC game with Utah, it's got to be a 20-point favorite in that game, especially at home. Florida State's on the SEC network. Oklahoma State. Bedlam at 8 o'clock on Fox. Huge game. Oklahoma State is certainly capable at home to knock off Oklahoma. Then we've got the Territorial Cup. Arizona State coming off the big upset win against Oregon, hosting Arizona, Cal and UCLA on FS1, and then late night Fresno State and San Jose State. So it's all about Ohio State, Michigan at noon. I'll put my second screens on South Carolina, Clemson, and Georgia Tech. 3:30, as I said, Paul Bunyan's Axe with Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the Iron Bowl, of course. And I'm going to be interested to see a little Washington State at all. There are no huge games early evening there or even into the night. I guess Oklahoma State would be the biggest game in terms of a conference championship and a college football playoff appearance. That's a reasonable game to expect a possible upset. I don't give Colorado much chance against Utah. So I'm just going to gravitate to the best game. That's a sequence where between Kansas State, Iowa State, North Carolina State, LSU, Texas A&M certainly is going to have the most talent on the field. But the Sooners and the Cowboys, Oklahoma State, Arizona State, all those games mixed up playing at the same time, I'm going to gravitate to the best game. Who's ever playing the best game in the fourth quarter, I'm going to be locked in on that game. And there you have it for a college football weekend. Let me get through the comments and let you know that I've been doing nothing today but booking top-notch guests to highlight and preview Rivalry Week. Ohio State, Michigan, we've got covered from every angle. Minnesota, Wisconsin, Clemson, South Carolina, Alabama, Auburn, Oklahoma State, Oregon State, and a whole bunch of other games that we will preview here. All right, everyone, if you have left me a comment, and somebody did early in the live chat in which they left a comment, they wanted me to respond to a certain playoff scenario. Two issues there. I can no longer see the comment because it's long gone. And number two, your scenario was very isolated. So I need context. I need to know what has happened across the nation. You just can't give me two teams or one conference and expect me to respond to that because these selections are not made in a silo. So please give me some context to that. Otherwise, I will try to find the super chat that I missed, but I apologize and I certainly recognize and thank you to whomever made that super chat contribution. All right. Lock it in here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. And Christmas is coming, folks. Grab the link in the description section of any of the videos, and you are going to see tons of videos over the next several days, getting us set for Rivalry Weekend. Some really good notes here I see in the live chat about a number of the Rivalry games this week. And also keep in mind, as I remind you on a regular basis, if you've got a comment or a question that you want me to respond to and it's in the chat, just copy and paste it and leave it to one of the comment section. And right about the time that I wanted to rest and relax the rest of the night, somebody's calling me. Here we go.
The call will start at the beep.
Hey, it's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hey, Mark, it's George in Oregon.
Hey, George. What's going on, man?
I miss the good old days.
Which are?
This is the best time of year. It should all be winding up. Who's going to the Rose Bowl? Who's going to the Peach Bowl? Who's going to the Orange Bowl? But no, nothing matters anymore except the Invitational.
Yep. You got it.
They've ruined it. They better stop. They better stop. They're going to lose. You can't get seats in an NFL game anymore. People quit caring. They better stop it.
It's not going to stop, George. It's just going to be expanded.
I guess that might be how they handle it. I think it sucks. I feel so sorry for the Pac-12 and all the minor conferences. You know, it's just not fair, man. They used to get their pride and glory, win their championship, and they were the champions. And now it's one team. And 15 teams are paying players, and the other ones are just on the outside looking in. Or not. I can't prove that.
I don't think so. That's certainly a theory.
Even Phil Knight can't buy a championship. That's problematic. Phil Knight's not bigger than the Florida Gator boosters and the Oklahoma boosters and the Alabama boosters and ABC and ESP backing not ESPN. I mean other people backing them up. Yeah, it's just become a circus. It's not right. It's just not right. Come on, Georgia has 22 5-stars. That's ridiculous.
So you would disband the playoff. Is that how you would fix all of that?
Nobody from Oklahoma that's a 5-star wants to play for Oklahoma no more. Nobody that's a 5-star from anywhere wants to play for anybody anymore. One team gobbles them all up. And that's not the way it is. Everybody wants to play in front of their home crowd for their alma mater and make their parents proud. So something's going on. Why would a kid from Miami go play in New Jersey or something? That's ridiculous.
It's what we've got right now, George, and we'll just have to embrace it and enjoy it.
So sticking with what we got right now, I'm real happy, man. At our position, the Florida Gators.
Sure.
I don't mind. New Year's 6 day, even if we didn't get a New Year's 6 bowl, we're all happy. No one's screaming fire Dan Mullen,
And they shouldn't be.
Right. Hey, what do you think about that Oregon Arizona State game? Wasn't that classic?
Oh, I thought it was great. That's what college football is all about this time of year. We're all.
Stay up for that?
What's that?
Did you stay up for it and watch it?
Well, I kind of had to. I was at work until almost 3 o'clock in the morning. So yeah, and then I was doing a live stream here until like 4 o'clock in the morning. And I'm trying to avoid that tonight because I haven't eaten anything since noon, and I've got to get up. This is a little preview for everybody that's still on the line. We've got 81 on the line. So Uncle Lou has asked me to come on his show tomorrow morning. So I've got to make a phone call at 8:15 in the morning. So basically, this is going to be, if you want to hear me groggy and unprepared, it's going to be me basically setting my alarm for 8:10. Jumping out of bed, or maybe not even jumping out of bed, making a phone call to Uncle Lou at 8:15. We'll talk some college football. Then I'll hopefully be able to get back to sleep right after that.
Well, let's get out of here so you can get at least 5 hours of sleep.
We'll try that. George, thanks for the call, and enjoy Florida State. That's your game this week.
Pardon me?
Florida State week, so enjoy it.
Yeah, I'll be happy with a 1-point win at this point. I don't even care. Just give me a win.
I hear you.
I don't even care about embarrassing Florida State. Just win the game. I like their interim head coach. I hope we don't totally beat them down too bad.
Okay. Let's go. I'm going to go 34-17.
That sounds good to me. 34-20 even.
Okay. There you go. All right, George. Have a great night, man. Thanks for the support as always, man.
You're welcome.
Take care. All right, everyone. I'm going to shut it down. I'll be on Uncle Lou's at 8:15 in the morning, or part of me will be probably not completely mentally there, but I will make the phone call. We'll have a good time talking college football. I've got tons of content coming your way. Rivalry week is here, and I will preview it like you can't imagine right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Thank you so much, everyone.